Our quality of life here in the nation's capital can be traced back to the Chesapeake Bay ecosystem in some form or another. On November 15th, President Biden signed the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill into law, which will aid in funding the Environmental Protection Agency's Chesapeake Bay program, with plans to provide $238 million over the next 5 years. Tim Wheeler, a journalist who has been covering restoration projects in the Chesapeake for 30 years for the Baltimore Sun, prior to joining the Bay Journal in 2016, provides insights to what this new funding will mean for restoration projects in the Bay.
The infrastructure bill by itself provides a lot more money to EPA and to the Bay program specifically. We're talking about a 50% boost in the overall funding for the Bay program.
This funding should help the 6 Bay states and the District of Columbia's pledge to meet limits for nitrogen and sediment pollution in the Chesapeake Bay by 2025.
But money will help in some respects. Some of this is a lot of the problems with the water quality side of things with nitrogen have to do with runoff from stormwater, and that is runoff from farmland primarily, but also from urban and suburban areas.
An important species in the bay that helps clean the water are oysters, which have been depleted over time from an unstable environment.
They're a keystone species. They build their own habitat. They provide habitat for a lot of other marine creatures, and they help filter the water.
Oysters are the Swiss Army knife of bay creatures, and they perform a multitude of tasks out there in terms of helping make the Chesapeake Bay a healthy, vital ecosystem. There are a multitude of cleanup efforts and restoration projects within the Chesapeake Bay, one of which is oyster restoration. Oyster restoration efforts have been developed by larger organizations like the Oyster Recovery Partnership, and also through individual efforts like local DMV artist Jennie Berry. Jennie is a nurse at a Maryland hospital by day, but started a small art business to both help raise awareness in her community and help fund oyster restoration efforts along the Chesapeake.
I'm taking these oysters away from from the bay where they can be, where they should be going probably. Even if the oysters aren't sourced like from the Chesapeake Bay, any oyster shell can help with our oysters in the Chesapeake Bay. So I just started. That was like weighing on my mind.
She has recently joined forces with the Oyster Recovery Partnership by donating 5% of her sales to fund restoration projects.
And so I just reached out to them and said, that I have this stuff that I do, and I'm taking these oysters away from the bay. How can I give back?
Jennie's efforts are not alone. In light of the new community momentum that the infrastructure bill has inspired, communities and individuals alike are diving into recovery efforts across the Chesapeake. The Oyster Recovery Partnership is one of the leaders in oyster recovery efforts in the DMV portion of the bay. The partnership supports numerous programs to save oysters in the bay, especially those that aid other large-scale restoration efforts.
We engage the community with programs like Marylanders Grow Oysters, which is an all-volunteer program in that, the people who sign up to grow oysters are just people who love oysters and want to support, their local waterway, grow oysters for their local waterway. So we have, I think, 36 Chesapeake Bay tributaries that participate with 2,000 growers and ridiculous amounts of spat on shell going into that program every year.
The partnership also supports public fishery reefs, and their experts work with local watermen to identify where they want oyster shells.
And like I said, partnership is a critical part of our name. Of course, oysters in the Chesapeake Bay are valuable for their environmental benefit, like their ecological services, the water filtration and the habitat creation, but they're also a really amazing, economic keystone as well, right?
The fundraising received from the infrastructure bill is expected to further boost restoration goals for organizations concerned with bay health, but the recent community support to help these efforts are creating hope for the future of the bay. The funding received from the infrastructure bill is expected to further boost restoration goals for organizations concerned with bay health. Community involvement has proven key to helping restore the bay's oyster population, And the funding from the infrastructure bill should also aid Bay states in meeting their restoration goals by 2025.